made progress as a nation, we remain alive to structural constraints that impede the pace of economic development. Aware that sustainable economic transformation is predicated on timely implementation of appropriate policy, rigor, and institutional reforms, I propose the following interventions that will improve the business environment, increase efficiency in public service delivery, and strengthen the accountability and transparency of public finance management. First, let me focus on public procurement reforms. Mr. Speaker, in my last budget speech, I informed this House of the government's plan to fully automate public procurement and disposal processes by implementing an end-to-end e-government procurement system. Mr. Speaker, Phase 1 of e-government procurement system has successfully undergone user acceptance testing and piloting in 12 selected MDAs and counties. This piloting will continue up to December 2024. The system comprises, among others, an e-marketplace, electronic marketplace, for the common use items where prices for various outlets are feasible, allowing intense competition in procurement of these common use items. Once the e-government procurement system is rolled out, all MDAs and executive offices of county governments will be required to fully transition to the system, while state agencies and corporations, county assemblies, and even county agencies will be onboarded in the second phase within the 2024-2025 fiscal year. The system will reduce cost of goods, works, and even services between 10 and 15%, maximize value for money, and increase the transparency of procurement. Second, let me turn to restraining growth of public sector wage bill. Mr. Speaker, the public sector wage bill continues to rise, leaving few resources for development. Public sector wage bill stood at 38.2% of the ratio as a ratio of total revenue in 2021. To contain the wage bill, the government implemented a wage freeze in the financial years 2021-22, 2022-23, in addition to eliminating and streamlining the number of allowances. Further actions planned in relation to containing the wage bill include: first, all MDAs and county governments should review and rationalize their staff establishment to ensure affordability, fiscal sustainability with the right composition and skill sets. Second, the government will roll out a unified human resource information system for the entire public sector starting from 1st July. The system consolidates human resource and payroll data in the public service for access through single warehouse. The system has been linked to the Kenya Revenue Authority, iTax, to facilitate filing of payee returns. This reform will eliminate the multiple manual and standalone payroll systems. Third, the Salaries and Remuneration Commission will continue to streamline allowances paid in the public sector through harmonization and rationalization of categories, rates, rules for allowances. And fourth, the Salaries and Remuneration Commission will progressively review allowances and benefits in the future, collective bargaining agreements, and align them to the provisions of allowances policy framework for the public service. Third, let me turn to state corporations reform. In order to address the challenges faced by state corporations, including government-owned enterprises, the government will first privatize government-owned enterprises whose mandates are no longer relevant, those that require huge budgetary allocations for bailouts, and those producing goods and services that are more efficiently produced by the private sector. Second, restructure the state corporations through mergers and or transfer back to parent ministries or relevant state corporations to remove duplication of functions, and enhance the efficiencies and synergies in operations so as to optimize use of limited resources. And ensure state corporations are self-sustaining, generate additional revenue to the exchequer, and also ensure quality service delivery to Kenyans. In addition, Mr. Speaker, the government is committed to implement policy changes to ensure government-owned enterprises realize their full potential. You will note that in 2023, the cabinet approved the ownership policy for the government-owned enterprises. And this is a key governance reform framework. Mr. Speaker, to anchor the policy in law and to give effect to its operationalization, a draft Government-Owned Enterprise Bill 2024 has been finalized and is undergoing public participation. Once the process is completed and an approval granted by Cabinet, the bill will be submitted to this august House for consideration, and I'm seeking support from this House for approval of the bill. Mr. Speaker, we have also prepared a draft Government Investment Regulations 2024 to provide a framework for efficient and effective management of government investment. The draft regulations will be taken through public participation before submission to this House for consideration and, if possible, approval. Fourth, let me turn to pending bills. Mr. Speaker, in the last budget statement, I informed this House that the government plans to establish a pending bills verification committee to carry out a thorough analysis of all stock of pending bills for the period 1st July 2005 to 30th June 2022, and formulate measures to stop accumulation of pending bills going forward. Mr. Speaker, as you are aware now, His Excellency the President inaugurated the Pending Bills Verification Committee in November 2023. The committee received a total of 94,997 pending bills claims valued at Kenya shillings 662.3 billion. Analysis of the pending bill claims submitted by MDAs is ongoing. The general public has been given an opportunity to submit any pending bill claims owed by the national government. The committee is expected to complete its work and submit a report by October 2024 for implementation within the fiscal framework. Fifth, the national assets and inventory management reforms. Mr. Speaker, the National Treasury has initiated reforms geared towards automating assets and inventory management in MDAs as well as county governments. In this regard, the National Treasury will operationalize the assets and inventory management modules of IFMIS, with the module of all MDAs scheduled to launch and go live in July 2024. The rollout of county governments will commence thereafter. These reforms will enable the accounting officers to have feasibility of all assets and inventory under their control and facilitate optimal assets utilization. Sixth, let me turn to financial sector reforms. Mr. Speaker, the Kenya banking sector remains stable, resilient, and continues to play its role in mobilizing funds and channeling them to deserving productive economic sectors and activities. The banking sector remained profitable with a growth of assets of 0.3%. It is now standing at 7.74 trillion in February 2024. Credit from commercial banks to the private sector stood at around 6.9% in terms of growth in April 2024 and has benefited key sectors of the economy. The Financial Inclusion Fund, popularly known as the Hustler Fund, and the de-risking of lending to the MSMEs through the Credit Guarantee Scheme have facilitated additional lending to the MSME sector. Mr. Speaker, to position the banking sector to effectively play its role in Kenya's socio-economic transformation, 3 recent reforms have been implemented. First, the licensing and oversight of digital credit providers to address inherent challenges, including the high cost of credit, unethical debt collection, inadequate disclosures and lack of transparency, breach of data privacy, and abuse of personal information. As at the end of March 2024, 51 digital credit providers have been licensed. Secondly, on climate change, the CBK in April 2024 issued draft Kenya Green Finance Taxonomy for public participation that will serve as a tool to classify whether particular economic activities are green or environmentally sustainable and serve as a guide for banking sector and other market participants in making informed investment decisions or financing decisions. That, to eliminate money laundering and vulnerability in the banking sector, the CBK has revised the anti-money laundering and combating the financing of terrorism and proliferation of financing, and a supervisory framework has been implemented so that the risk-based supervision is enacted, undertaking institutional and sectoral risk assessment and enhancing staff complement capacity for supervision. Mr. Speaker, the Kenya banking sector is exposed to dynamic global, regional, and even local developments, necessitating reforms in this respect. The following reforms are proposed. First, the Central Bank of Kenya intends to progressively increase the minimum core capital for banks from the current 1 billion to Kenya shillings 10 billion. The CBK will engage the market for an appropriate timetable to achieve this goal. This is intended to strengthen the resilience and increase the bank's capacity to finance large-scale projects while creating sufficient capital buffer to absorb and withstand shocks posed by continuous emerging risks associated with adoption of technology and innovation as institutions expand. Second, the Central Bank plans to amend the Banking Act to provide for stiff dissuasive penalties that are proportionate to the violations committed, support a strong compliance culture in banks, and also make sure that it aligns to international best practice. Let me turn to capital markets developments. Mr. Speaker, in order to enhance price discovery and boost income for coffee farmers, the Capital Markets Authority has licensed 14 coffee brokers, and so far, 29 auctions have been conducted under the Capital Markets Coffee Exchange Regulations 2020 at the Nairobi Coffee Exchange. In addition, the authority has approved the direct settlement system, which has been operationalized by one of the local commercial banks. Let me turn to pension reforms. Mr. Speaker, majority of Kenyans remain uncovered with the retirement benefits coverage stands at about 26%. We need to address this challenge. The Cabinet has approved the National Retirement Benefits Policy in November 2023 that requires all entities to enroll all the employees, both contractual and permanent, and pensionable for registered retirement benefits scheme. To effectively implement the policy, we have initiated the review and harmonization of all the laws governing the retirement benefits sector. Mr. Speaker, to ensure sustainability of the public service pension system, we are revamping the public service pension administration through digitization and re-engineering of the pension management system, which is expected to be completed by December 2024. Mr. Speaker, the informal sector has about 17 million workers, and that accounts for about 83% of the total workforce in the country. This segment has remained excluded from pension coverage, mainly due to its unique and heterogeneous needs. The National Treasury has established the Kenya National Entrepreneur Saving Trust, KNEST, to handle pensions from the informal sector and anchor the savings component of the Hustler Fund while providing a channel for voluntary savings. Let me turn to insurance reforms. Mr. Speaker, to facilitate the growth of the insurance sector, the government developed a national insurance policy. This policy is guided by the review of the Insurance Act, which has served its purpose, albeit with progressive amendments, for the last 30 years. The Insurance Professionals Bill 2024, currently under consideration by this august House, will also strengthen the standards of practice in insurance and improve stability and performance of the insurance companies. And now turn to the fiscal framework, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the government's fiscal policy is to enhance fiscal consolidation efforts to reduce debt vulnerabilities and rebuild fiscal buffers amid significant global and even domestic challenges. These external and domestic shocks that Kenya has experienced serve as a reminder of the importance of fiscal buffers. Mr. Speaker, the focus of our fiscal policy thus remains to reduce the deficit from 5.7% of GDP in the current financial year to 3.3% in the financial year 2024-2025. We're going to do this through various means. First, domestic resource mobilization. Mr. Speaker, implementation of government's plan for rapid and inclusive socio-economic transformation largely depends on robust revenue growth rate. Indeed, despite significant government investment in reforming the tax structure, the tax to GDP is estimated at 11.5% of GDP as of 2022-2023 against an estimated potential of 25% of GDP. And this is also the convergence criteria in the East African community countries. We therefore urgently need to address the challenges that negatively affects our revenue correction, some of these challenges include, first, there is an existence of hard-to-tax sectors. The economy is dominated by a large informal sector that is mostly outside the current tax instrument, leaving the country to rely on a narrow tax base, and it is time to reverse this trend. Second, proliferation of tax expenditures over the years. Tax expenditures are estimated right now at 2.9% of GDP if you consider the 2022 data, that it has major erosion to the tax base. Third, low tax compliance largely attributed to factors such as the technical and complex nature of our tax laws and procedures, taxpayer apathy due to perceived inefficient use of tax revenues, high compliance costs, and inadequate taxpayer education. Fourth, there are difficulties in taxing emerging digital economy. The tax system is not fully equipped to deal with the emerging business models that leverage on the digital technology. Finally, Mr. Speaker, inadequate modern technology equipment for use at every stage or exit border points, misdeclaration and even misclassification of goods, inadequate customs border posts, infiltration of counterfeits, smuggling, and diversion of goods. Mr. Speaker, in order to address these challenges and enhance the revenue mobilization, we shall implement a combination of tax policy and administrative reforms. The reforms are premised on the need to ensure that taxes are more supportive to economic activity. They do not distort the market and have a predictable tax structure. The reforms include, first, implementation of tax policy and administration measures proposed in the Finance Bill 2024. Second, implementation of the medium-term revenue strategy to expand the tax base to 20% of GDP over the medium term. Third, to strengthen the tax administration for enhanced compliance through leveraging on technology to revolutionize tax processes, sealing revenue loopholes, and enhancing the efficiency of tax system. And finally, we're focusing on unlocking additional non-tax revenue potential by MDAs through the services they offer to the public. Let me turn to improving the efficiency of public expenditure. Mr. Speaker, turning to expenditures, we should ensure that our scarce resources are used in the most efficient and effective way. Mr. Speaker, in order to move towards a balanced budget and further improve efficiency in public spending, the following bold actions and reforms have been outlined in the financial year 2024-2025. First, rationalization of transfers to SAGAs by at least 30% from the financial year 2023-2024 approved budget, in line with the overall austerity measures cutting across all ministries, departments, and agencies. Second, curtailing spending on the following expenditure items: foreign travels, rationalization of all training expenses across government, and restricting all training to within government institutions, rationalizing all allocations for purchases of motor vehicles, and suspending purchases of furniture for a period of 1 year, and suspending all refurbishment and partitioning of government offices. Third, The expenditure control measures that include suspension of all new recruitment in the public sector for 1 year, for the next 1 year, audit and cleanse all public payrolls, pension, and transfers to the vulnerable, with a view to eliminate ghost workers as well as enforce payments of salary scales and that are approved as recommended by SRC, and consolidation of public procurement for common user items. Fourth, minimizing government expenditure but by leveraging on technology, and this will entail use of Wi-Fi emails for efficient communication. 5, reviewing the insurance schemes, especially looking at EDU, AFIA, indigence, public service, police, and prison commissions and independent offices under the universal health coverage, and align them to the Social Health Insurance Fund. The Social Health Insurance Fund now will be important because it will afford all Kenyans a universal health care with more benefits. 6th, suspending the policy of SAGAs investing surplus funds and enforce the requirement of PFM Act 2012 and the PFM Regulations 2015 to surrender such funds to the Exchequer. And finally, reviewing the regional development authorities to remove duplication of laws within those county governments and MDAs. Since the beginning of this financial year, the government has also implemented initiatives to contain the growth of expenditures. First, the government has undertaken measures to reduce spending to non-priority expenditures. Second, the public-private partnership framework targets commercially viable projects, but also considers the contingent liabilities that come under this framework. And third, we are reviewing the portfolio of externally funded projects with a view to restructuring and realigning them with bottom-up economic transformation agenda. All these initiatives, Mr. Speaker, will help lower the expenditures. I now turn to revenue measures, revenue projections. Mr. Speaker, with the policy measures and structural reforms highlighted above, we project total revenue corrections, including appropriations in aid for the financial year 2024-2025 budget, to be Kenya shillings 3,343.2 billion, equivalent to 18.5% of GDP. Of these, ordinary revenue is projected to be Kenya shillings 2,917.2 billion, equivalent to 16.2% of GDP. Ministerial appropriations in aid is projected to be 426 billion shillings. Grants to this budget are provided at Kenya shillings 51.8 billion, which is 0.3% of GDP. Expenditure projections. Mr. Speaker, total expenditure in the financial year 2024-2025 budget is projected at Kenya shillings 3,992 billion, or 22.1% of GDP. Of this, the recurrent expenditure will amount to Kenya shillings 2,840 billion, or 15.7% of GDP. The development expenditures, including allocations to domestic and foreign finance projects, contingency fund, and even equalization fund, is Kenya shillings 707.4 billion, equivalent to 3.9% of GDP. Total allocation to county governments is projected at Kenya shillings 444.5 billion, of which equitable share is 400.1 billion. Fiscal balance. Mr. Speaker, given the projected revenue grants against the projected expenditures, the fiscal deficit including grants is projected at 597 billion, equivalent to 3.3% of GDP, and this is down from Kenya shillings 925 billion, or 5.7% of GDP in 2023-2024. In this respect, the primary balance will improve to a surplus of 2.3% of GDP from a deficit of 0.4% of GDP in the current financial year. The fiscal deficit for 2024-2025 will be financed by net external borrowing of 333.8 billion, equivalent to 1.8% of GDP, and net domestic borrowing of 263.2 billion, which is equivalent to 1.5% of GDP. Public debt management, Mr. Speaker, Kenya meets its obligations promptly, and no debt arrears have been accumulated. Public debt is projected to remain within sustainable levels on account of fiscal consolidation path that reflects the decline in the ratio of debt to GDP in present value terms over the medium term. To improve Kenya's debt sustainability and boost our credit rating position, the government will continue to implement measures to enhance growth of foreign exchange earnings. Our medium-term debt management strategy aims at lowering the cost and risks in the debt portfolio. In this regard, the government will slow down uptake of new external commercial debt and undertake liability management operations through debt swaps and other innovative solutions. The government will also diversify sources of financing through issuance of Panda Board, Samurai Board, and Sukuk in diverse financial markets in China, Japan, and the Gulf regions, respectively. The government will maximize use of concessional financing from bilateral and multilateral institutions to improve the debt sustainability and boost our credit rating. Let me turn to public-private partnership framework, Mr. Speaker. Due to the limited fiscal space, the government will continue to scale up the use of public-private partnership financing for commercially viable projects. Currently, there are 37 projects at various stages of PPP project cycle. In order to enhance viability of PPP projects, I will soon be proposing amendments to the PFM Act 2012 to speed up the process of financial close, as well as ensure that the related fiscal cost and contingent liabilities are within acceptable levels. Let me turn to public investment management. Mr. Speaker, in order to increase efficiency and effectiveness of public spending, the government will continue to implement public investment management regulations at the national government and commence a rollout of county governments. The regulations are aimed at streamlining and initiating execution and delivery of public projects within the timelines. Further, the government will roll out public investment management information system to all MDAs to improve the management of development projects in the country. Strengthening financial management reforms is very critical, and now I'll turn to this migration to accrual accounting, Mr. Speaker. The transition to accrual accounting from cash basis marks a significant milestone in our nation's journey to strengthening public finance management. In recognition of this, the Cabinet in March 2024 approved the transition from cash to accrual basis of accounting to improve cash management and enhance the financial and fiscal reporting. The accrual accounting will enable the government to account for all assets and liabilities, including all government assets. With accrual accounting, we will also be able to account for all pending bills, public debt, and pension liabilities. Mr. Speaker, this is an important step to strengthen the public finance management, and I will therefore direct all MDAs and county governments to migrate to accrual accounting starting July 2024. This effectively means, Mr. Speaker, that the last financial statement to be prepared on cash basis by national and county governments will be for the financial year 2023-2024. Mr. Speaker, let me turn to Treasury Single Account. Mr. Speaker, the PFM Act 2012 and its attendant registration provides for the establishment of the Treasury Single Account, TSA as we call it, system at both national and county government levels. Based on the experience over the last 10 years since the enactment of PFM Act 2012, the need to review the scope of TSE implementation has become apparent. To improve public cash management, it is necessary to operationalize other elements of the TSA system and that are envisaged in the law. The automation of government payments through the Integrated Financial Management Information System, IFMIS, and the Central Bank of Kenya Internet Banking, IB, system forms a good basis to widen the scope of Treasury single account system. The National Treasury undertook an inventory of bank accounts and balances held by public sector entities in various financial institutions and established that as at 30th June 2023, these entities held Kenya shillings 431.7 billion with various financial institutions. These large cash balances were not immediately accessible at the time when the government was very, very cash strained. Mr. Speaker, to address this challenge and underscore the government's unwavering commitment for fiscal discipline, transparency, and efficiency in the management of public finances, the Cabinet approved the implementation of Treasury single account system in a clustered approach. The system will consolidate government cash resources into a single account held at the Central Bank of Kenya and sub-treasury single accounts at the commercial banks. The National Treasury in this respect will establish a treasury function to manage the TSA and the TSA sub-account structure so that every day the government financial position is known and ascertained. The migration of the TSA system commences on 1st July 2024. Let me now turn to resource allocation under the bottom-up economic transformation agenda. Mr. Speaker, let me turn the highlights to government spending priorities in the coming financial year. And in light of the revenue challenges, significant expenditure demands, spending in the financial year 2024 to 2025 will focus on bottom-up economic transformation agenda priorities on 5 core areas with the highest impact on the economy. The first one will be agricultural transformation and inclusive growth. Mr. Speaker, the government focus will be on agricultural transformation and inclusive growth through the value chains approach. This aims at providing adequate and affordable working capital to all farmers through cooperative societies. We consider them as aggregators, and deploy the modern agricultural risk management instruments that ensure farming is profitable and incomes are predictable. In addition, it aims to transform farmers from food deficit to surplus producers through input finance, subsidies, and intensive agricultural extension support. This will raise productivity of key food value chains, reduce dependence on basic food imports, revamp underperforming export crops, and expand to new high-value emerging crops, and boost tea value chain through breeding and branding. Mr. Speaker, to attain food and nutrition security, I proposed an allocation of Kenya shillings 54.6 billion for various programs under this sector. This includes Kenya shillings 10 billion for the fertilizer subsidy program, Kenya shillings 6.1 billion for the National Agricultural Value Chain Development Project, Kenya shillings 2.5 billion for the Enable Youth Program, Kenya shillings 2.4 billion for the Enable Youth and Women in Agriculture, Kenya shillings 747 million for small-scale irrigation value chain, irrigation and value addition project, Kenya shillings 642.5 million for the food security and crop diversification project. Mr. Speaker, to improve livestock production, I propose Kenya shillings 2.4 billion for de-risking, inclusive and value enhancement of pastoral economies program, Kenya shillings 1.5 billion for livestock value chain support project, Kenya shillings 1.5 billion for Kenya livestock commercialization program, Kenya shillings 192.5 million for the embryo transfer project. I have also proposed Kenya shillings 300 million for the Development Leather Industrial Park, Kenani. Mr. Speaker, to support the growth of the brew economy, I propose a total of Kenya shillings 11.3 billion to the brew economy and fisheries subsector. This includes 3.7 billion to aquaculture business development project, Kenya shillings 3.1 billion to the Kenya Marine Fisheries and Socio-Economic Development Project, Kenya shillings 540 million for rehabilitation of fish riding sites, Kenya shillings 695.5 million for Riwatoni Ultra Modern Fish Hub, and Kenya shillings 600 million for marine fish assessment. Mr. Speaker, to raise agricultural productivity, enhance resilience to climate change risks in targeted smallholder farming and even pastoral communities, I propose an allocation of 340 million shillings towards adding drought and emergencies project. Mr. Speaker, to ensure legitimacy of RAD ownership and settle the RAD race, I propose a sum of 5.5 billion. This allocation will cater for the processing and registration of the title deeds, settlement of the RAD race, digitization of the RAD registry, georeferencing of RAD parcels, and construction of RAD registries. Second, I want to turn to transforming micro, small, and medium enterprises economy. Mr. Speaker, accessibility and affordable credit to most Kenyans at the bottom of the pyramid remains a challenge. To address this challenge, the government is proposing an additional allocation of 5 billion shillings to the Financial Inclusion or HASRAS Fund to scale up access to credit for households and MSMEs. I also propose an additional 200 million for the Youth Enterprise Development Fund, Kenya shillings 162.5 million for the Center for Entrepreneurship Project, and Kenya shillings 1.9 billion for Rural Kenya Financial Inclusion Facility. Third, let me turn to housing and settlement, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the government's commitment to turn the housing challenge into an economic opportunity to create quality jobs for the youth directly in the construction sector and indirectly through the production of building products. This will be achieved through, among other measures, facilitating a delivery of 200,000 houses per annum and enabling low-cost housing mortgages. To continue supporting this initiative, I have proposed an allocation of 92.1 billion shillings for the housing, urban development, and public works. This includes Kenya shillings 8.3 billion under the Kenya Urban Program, Kenya shillings 3 billion to Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company for enhancement of the company's capital as well as for lending to the primary mortgage lenders, Kenya shillings 32.5 billion for construction of affordable housing units, Kenya shillings 15 billion for the construction of social housing unit, Kenya shillings 14.7 billion for social and physical infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, other proposed allocation to the housing, urban development, and public works include 11.3 billion for the Kenya Informal Settlement Improvement Project Phase 3, Kenya shillings 1 billion for the construction of markets, Kenya shillings 1 billion for the National Slum Upgrading Program, Kenya shillings 1 billion for the construction of housing units for the National Police and Kenya prisons, Kenya shillings 496.3 million for the construction of food bridges, Kenya shillings 444 million targeted to support construction of county headquarters that are targeted. Fourth, universal healthcare coverage. Mr. Speaker, the government is committed and determined to realize the constitutional right to health by promoting access to quality and affordable healthcare through universal healthcare coverage program. Towards this end, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed an allocation of 127 billion to the health sector to support various activities and programs. These include 4.2 billion for Kenya shillings, 4.2 billion for universal healthcare coverage, coordination and management unit, Kenya shillings 2 billion for free maternity healthcare, Kenya shillings 3.6 billion for managed equipment services, Kenya shillings 861.5 million to provide medical cover for the orphans, elderly, and severely disabled persons in our society, Kenya shillings 4.6 billion to cater for the stipend and the acquisition of specialized medical equipment for the community health promoters, and 4.1 billion shillings for primary health care fund. Mr. Speaker, throughout the cases of HIV, AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis, and enhance the vaccines and immunization program in the country, I have proposed Kenya shillings 28.7 billion for the Global Fund and Kenya shillings 4.6 billion for vaccines and immunization programs, respectively. Mr. Speaker, to enhance the early diagnosis and management of cancer and reduce the burden of treatment among Kenyans, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shillings 1.1 billion to strengthen cancer management in Kenyatta National Hospital and Kisii Level 5 hospitals. I have also proposed Kenya shillings 2 billion to the Emergencies, Chronic and Critical Illness Fund. Mr. Speaker, to improve health service delivery, I have proposed a sum of Kenya shillings 29.7 billion for Kenyatta National Hospital and Moi Teaching and Referral Hospitals. This include 2.6 billion for the construction of Kenyatta National Hospital Burns and Pediatric Center. I've also proposed Kenya shillings 5.2 billion for the Kenya Medical Supplies Agency, Kenya shillings 2.5 billion for the Kenya Medical Research Institute, Kenya shillings 1 billion for procurement of family planning and reproductive health commodities, and Kenya shillings 760 million for procurement of equipment at the National Blood Transfusion Services. Further, to strengthen the capacity of medical personnel, I have proposed Kenya shillings 3.7 billion for medical interns, Kenya shillings 406 million for training of health personnel, and Kenya shillings 8.6 billion for Kenya Medical Training Center. Finally, the digital superhighway and creative economy. Mr. Speaker, investment in digital superhighway and creative economy continues to play a critical role in enabling the government achieve the objectives of bottom-up economic transformation agenda through increased productivity and competitiveness. On the creative economy promotion of music, theater, and graphic design, digital animation, fashion, and craft, among others, continues to create jobs opportunities for the youth. Mr. Speaker, to support the growing digital superhighway and creative economy, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shillings 16.3 billion to fund the initiatives in the information, communication, and technology sector. Specifically, this proposed allocation includes 1.1 billion for government shared services, 704 million for digital superhighway, 2.3 billion for the construction of Kenya Advanced Institute of Science and Technology at Concert Technopolis, 2.8 billion for Kenya Digital Economy Acceleration Project, and 2.8 billion for maintenance and rehabilitation of the last mile county connectivity network. In order to fast-track the development of the Concert Technopolis city, I have proposed an allocation of 1.5 billion for the horizontal infrastructure phase 1 and Kenya shillings 5.2 billion for the Concert data center and smart city facilities. Other key allocations to critical sectors supporting better include investment in critical infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, the government continues to expand and maintain critical infrastructure in roads, railways, sea, and airports to achieve socio-economic transformation. That will also enhance Kenya's competitiveness and facilitate cross-border trade and regional integration. Towards this end, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shillings 193.4 billion for development of roads. This includes 86.2 billion to support construction of roads and bridges, Kenya shillings 37.7 billion for the rehabilitation of roads, and Kenya shillings 69.5 billion for road maintenance. Mr. Speaker, to expand the railway transport and even associated infrastructure, I have proposed Kenya shillings 25.2 billion. I've also proposed Kenya shillings 2.4 billion for infrastructure development at Dogo Kudu Special Economic Zone, Kenya shillings 1 billion for Nairobi Bus Rapid Transport Project, Kenya shillings 316 million for promotion of e-mobility project, and Kenya shillings 239.4 billion for the development of Nairobi Railway City. To facilitate movement of goods and people in our inland waters, I have proposed an additional Kenya shillings 200 million for acquisition of ferries for Lake Victoria. Mr. Speaker, to scale up production of reliable and affordable energy, I have proposed an allocation of 69.7 billion to the energy subsector. This includes Kenya shillings 27.8 billion for the national grid system, Kenya shillings 24 billion for rural electrification, Kenya shillings 14 billion for the development of geothermal energy, Kenya shillings 2.2 billion for the alternative energy technologies, and Kenya shillings 920 million for the development of nuclear energy. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to improving education outcomes. The government continues to invest in education to improve education outcomes and create a level playing field for all Kenyan children. Mr. Speaker, from this end, I have proposed a total allocation of 656.6 billion, or 27.6% of total expenditures to the education sector. This includes Kenya shillings 358.2 billion to the Teacher Service Commission, Kenya shillings 142.3 billion for basic education, Kenya shillings 128 billion for higher education and research, Kenya shillings 30.7 billion for technical vocational education and training. Mr. Speaker, the allocation of the education sector includes Kenya shillings 9.1 billion free primary education, 61.9 billion shillings for free day secondary education, Kenya shillings 30.7 billion for junior secondary school capitation, and Kenya shillings 5 billion for the examinations fee waiver. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shillings 13.4 billion for the conversion of 46,000 junior secondary school interns to permanent and pensionable terms. Kenya shillings 1.3 billion for the training of teachers on competency-based curriculum, and Kenya shillings 360 million for the digital literacy program and ICT integration in our secondary schools. Mr. Speaker, to support infrastructure and infrastructure development and ensure safe learning in our schools, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shillings 3.2 billion for primary and secondary schools infrastructure, Kenya shillings 1 billion for construction of classroom for junior secondary schools, and Kenya shillings 2.3 billion for the construction and equipping of technical training institutes and vocational training centers. Further, I have proposed Kenya shillings 11.1 billion for the Kenya Primary Education Equity in Learning Program, Kenya shilling 1.8 billion for construction of integrated resource centers, and Kenya shillings 1.5 billion for the Kenya Secondary Education Quality Improvement Project. Mr. Speaker, other proposed allocations to the education sector include Kenya shillings 1.1 billion for the research, science, and technology innovation. Mr. Speaker, the government is implementing the new funding model for public universities and TVET institutions through the provision of government scholarships and loans apportioned according to students' need. The new funding framework seeks to offer students whose households are at the bottom of the pyramid equal opportunity in accessing university education, as well as technical training. Towards this end, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shillings 35.9 billion to the Higher Education Loans Boards for provision of loans to university and TVET students, Kenya shillings 16.9 billion for the scholarship for university students, and Kenya shillings 7.7 billion capitation and scholarship for TVET students. Let me move now to supporting manufacturing for job creation. Mr. Speaker, further to promote local industries, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shillings 23.7 billion under various implementing ministries, departments, and agencies. Out of these, 4.5 billion will support establishment of county integrated agro-industrial parks, Kenya shillings 1.9 billion for supporting access to finance and enterprise recovery SAFA project, Kenya shillings 1.1 billion for construction of investor sheds in Athi River, Kenya shillings 1.9 billion for establishment of 6 flagship export processing zones hubs, Kenya shillings 440 million to the development of special economic zones textile park in Naivasha, and Kenya shillings 1 billion for the Kenya Jobs Economic Transformation KJET. In addition, Mr. Speaker, in order to revitalize and maximize benefits from our cash crops, the government will make further investments towards revival and enhancement of output. In this respect, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed Kenya shillings 2 billion for Coffee Cherry Revolving Fund. This is in addition to Kenya shillings 4 billion allocated in the current fiscal year. Kenya shillings 1.5 billion for payments of debts owed to sugarcane farmers, arrears to employees, and maintenance of cane testing units, Kenya shillings 120 million for cotton industry revitalization project, and Kenya shillings 150 million for the pyrethrum industry recovery. Mr. Speaker, in order to reduce over-reliance of the importation of edible oils and encourage local production and processing, I have proposed Kenya shillings 90 million for the coconut industry revitalization project, Kenya shillings 260 million for the National Edible Oils Crop Promotion Project and an allocation to National Agricultural Value Chain Development Project, which includes support for cashew nut development. Mr. Speaker, to enhance milk processing, I have proposed Kenya shillings 1.5 billion for excess milk mop-up, Kenya shilling 500 million for modernization of KCC milk factories, and Kenya shillings 250 million for the construction of a milk factory in Narok. Mr. Speaker, to equip our youth with essential training and internship opportunities, I have proposed an allocation of 1.3 billion for the Kenya Industry and Entrepreneurship Project, Kenya shillings 119.9 million for the construction of industrial research laboratories, and Kenya shillings 114.3 million for the constituency industrial development centers. I will now turn into improving security, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, enhanced national security creates an enabling environment for businesses to thrive while aiding faster economic recovery. It is in this regard, I have proposed an allocation of 377.5 billion to support the operations of the National Police Service, Defense, and National Intelligence Service and Prison Services. Mr. Speaker, the proposed allocations include Kenya shillings 173.1 billion for defense, 110.6 billion for National Police Service, 46.3 billion for the National Intelligence Service, and Kenya shillings 32.7 billion for prison services. I have proposed an allocation of 13.9 billion to cater for leasing police motor vehicles and the modernization program. Mr. Speaker, to step up the war on crime and embrace support to administration of justice, I have proposed Kenya shillings 918.4 million to equip the National Forensic Laboratory. Protecting the vulnerable groups, Mr. Speaker, as a caring government, we shall continue to protect the vulnerable members of our society. I have in this regard proposed an allocation of that 1.3 billion for social protection and affirmative actions in this budget. Mr. Speaker, out of this allocation, Kenya shillings 18.6 billion will cater for cash transfers to elderly persons, 7.9 billion for orphans and vulnerable children, Kenya shillings 1.2 billion for persons living with severe disabilities. Mr. Speaker, the proposed allocation includes 1.5 billion for the Kenya Hunger Safety Net Program, Kenya shillings 1.9 billion for the Kenya Social and Economic Inclusion Project. In addition, 815 million will go to Child Welfare Society of Kenya, 400 million to the Presidential Bursary for the orphans, Kenya shillings 600.1 million for National Council for Persons Living with Disabilities, and Kenya shillings 100 million for the National Albinism Support Program, and Kenya shillings 100 for National Autism Support Program. Let me turn to equity, poverty reduction, women and youth empowerment. Mr. Speaker, the most pressing challenge in our country at the moment is lack of jobs or job opportunities for the youth. This has been exacerbated by the multiple shocks that have hit our economy. And in order to empower the youth and support businesses owned by the youth and women, I have proposed Kenya shillings 89.5 billion for these initiatives. This allocation includes 10.4 billion for the National Youth Service, 1.1 billion for the Kenya Youth Empowerment Program, 200 million for the Youth Enterprise Development Fund, 162.5 billion for the Center for Entrepreneurship, 230 million for the establishment of youth empowerment centers, 2.7 million to National Youth Opportunity Towards Advancement, NYOTA. In addition, I have proposed Kenya shillings 649.8 million to strengthen the film industry in Kenya. Mr. Speaker, the government is committed to ensuring increased income for our women through employment creation and supporting women-led enterprises. And to further empower our women, I have proposed Kenya shillings 182.8 million for the Women Enterprise Fund, Kenya shillings 3.5 billion for the National Government Affirmative Action Fund. Mr. Speaker, to promote regional equity, reduce poverty, and enhance social development, I have proposed Kenya shillings 63 billion for the National Government Constituency Development Fund, as well as Kenya shillings 8 billion for the Equalization Fund to finance programs identified in marginal areas. Let me turn now to stimulating tourism, growth, sports, culture, and recreation and arts. Mr. Speaker, the government has prioritized expanding the space for creativity, including freedom of expression and protection of intellectual property rights. The government will also strengthen mainstreaming of arts and culture, infrastructure and support cultural production, and as well as creative economy. We are also cognizant of the brand value of Kenyans participating and excelling in international sports arena as incalculable. To support tourism, sports, culture, and even recreation, I have proposed an allocation of 23.7 billion, and this includes an allocation of 16.5 billion for the Sports, Arts, Social Development Fund, Kenya shillings 4.9 billion for the Tourism Fund, and Kenya shillings 2.2 billion for the Tourism Promotion Fund. Let me turn to environment protection, water and natural resources. Mr. Speaker, in order to support environment and water conservation and respond to climate change, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shillings 10.7 billion for forest resources conservation and management, 1.7 billion for forest research and development, 2.7 billion for environment management and protection, 5.9 billion for the Kenya Financing Locally Led Climate Action Project, 1.6 billion for meteorological services, and Kenya shillings 13.1 billion for wildlife security, conservation, and management. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed Kenya shillings 1 billion for wildlife research and development, Kenya shillings 1.2 billion for human-wildlife conflict compensation, and Kenya shillings 800 million for wildlife insurance. Mr. Speaker, to expand and access clean and adequate water for domestic and agricultural use, I have proposed an allocation of Kenya shillings 36.6 billion for the water and sewerage infrastructure development, 12.5 billion for water resources management, and Kenya shillings 1.9 billion for water storage and flood control. In addition, I have proposed 17.8 billion for irrigation and land reclamation, Kenya shillings 1.9 billion for water harvesting and storage for irrigation. I now turn to improving governance and sustaining the fight against corruption. To enhance good governance and Mr. Speaker, and scale up fight against corruption, I have proposed Kenya shillings 4.2 billion for the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, 4 billion for the Office of Director of Public Prosecution, 6.9 billion for the State Law Office, 8.7 billion for the Office of the Auditor General. In addition, Mr. Speaker, to enhance the oversight and registration of the role of Parliament, I propose an allocation of Kenya shillings 44.6 billion for Parliament. To enable administration and justice, I propose an allocation of 24.7 billion for the judiciary. This includes 900 million for construction and refurbishment of courts and 800 million for the automation of the judiciary. Allocations to the county governments, Mr. Speaker, I turn to this. The county governments will receive a proposed allocation of 400.1 billion as equitable share in the financial year 2024-2025. It's for the first time that they have arrived to this figure of 400 and surpassed it in the last 12 years of devolution. As equitable share of financial year 2024-2025. And this is equivalent to 25.48% of the actual revenue raised nationally for the financial year 2020-2021, which is in compliance with Article 203, subsection 2 of the Constitution of Kenya. In addition to the equitable share of revenue, a further 44.4 billion has been proposed as additional allocation to county governments. This comprises of 8.76 billion for the national government share of revenue, Kenya shillings 35.66 billion from proceeds of external loans and grants for the external loans and grants. Equalization Fund, Mr. Speaker, we have proposed an allocation of 8 billion for the Equalization Fund, which is 0.5% of the actual revenue raised nationally in 2020-2021 reference year. Measures to enhance county government's own source revenue, Mr. Speaker, the National Treasury is implementing a policy to support the enhancement of own source revenue by county governments as we await the enactment of the National Rating Bill. This bill will enable the county governments to correct more property rates, including contribution in lieu of rates. In addition, Mr. Speaker, a multi-agency committee has been formed to manage the rollout of the proposed integrated county revenue management system in 47 county governments. This system will increase transparency, accountability, and efficiency in revenue collection. Let me turn now to taxation measures, Mr. Speaker. The policy measures to support the budget, the tax policy measures supporting the budget for the financial year 2024-2025 budget are very, very critical. In the course of this year, we embarked on tax policy review through a number of tax studies that will support the development of a progressive tax system. Mr. Speaker, the objective of these reforms is to develop an elaborate tax policy that will raise adequate revenue to finance recurrent as well as development budgets. For this to materialize, we intend to first to develop diverse methods to enlarge the tax base. Second, we want to make sure that we minimize tax expenditures that amount to Kenya shillings 396 billion, which is equivalent to 2.9% of GDP as of 2022. Of the Kenya shillings 396 billion, 63.1% of it is on VAT refunds alone on zero-rated final consumer goods. Third, we want to create a tax system that is not only predictable to taxpayers, but also yields predictable revenues to government. Fourth, we want to develop a tax system that supports markets, that supports production, consumption, and even investments. Mr. Speaker, thank you. Mr. Speaker, the year 2024-2025 marks the beginning of these reforms through the proposed amendments in various tax laws contained in the Finance Bill 2024. Mr. Speaker, these reforms are part of a wider tax policy reforms contained in the medium-term revenue strategy, and I will shortly be providing highlights of these reforms. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, during the East African Community pre-budget consultations held in May 2024, the ministers responsible for finance and economic planning in the East African Community region agreed on customs measures that will support and protect industries in the region. Mr. Speaker, the tax measures proposed in the Finance Bill 2024 and the said custom measures are expected to generate an additional Kenya shillings 346.7 billion or 1.9% of GDP to the exchequer for the financial year 2024-2025. Let me start with custom duties. Mr. Speaker, allow me to provide highlights of some of the custom measures agreed during the pre-budget consultation with the East African Community partner states. Mr. Speaker, the ministers agreed on a number of measures for enhancing the competitiveness of locally manufactured products by allowing stays of application for the East African Community Common External Tariff, not to change the rates, and where necessary, adopt higher rates of duty to encourage local production in East African Community countries. The ministers also agreed on duty remissions for raw materials and inputs used by local manufacturers to facilitate East African Community domestic production. Mr. Speaker, in order to meet local demands and enhance food security in Kenya on key staple foods, Kenya was granted an extension of the current stay of application to import rice at a duty rate of 35% or US $200 per metric ton, whichever is higher, for 1 year, instead of East African Community Common External Tariff rate of 75% or $345 per metric ton, whichever is higher. And also, Kenya was allowed to import wheat at a duty rate of 10% instead of 35% for 1 year under the EAC, East African Community Duty Remission Scheme. Mr. Speaker, Kenya has a strong assembly of electronics industry, including mobile phones. In order to further open up the ICT sector to more investors, Kenya requested for duty remission on inputs for manufacture and assembly of smart telecommunication devices, including mobile phones, laptops, and tablets. This request was granted. Mr. Speaker, the local assembly of automotives continues to facilitate job creation with positive ripple effects in other supportive sectors, especially in the manufacturing of spare parts. In this regard, Kenya continued to develop capacity in the assembly of prime movers, road tractors, trailers, to meet both local and regional demand. In order to safeguard this capacity, Kenya was granted a stay of application of East African Common External Tariff rate of 10% to apply a duty rate of 25% for prime movers and 35% for trailers for 1 year. Further, in order to continue supporting the assembly of motorcycles in the region, East African community ministers in this regard agreed to extend the duty remission on importation of raw materials for the manufacture of parts used in the assembly of motorcycles, including leaf springs and wiring harness. In addition, ministers agreed to extend duty remission for completely knocked down kits for assembly of motorcycles at the rate of 10%. Mr. Speaker, the growth of investment in metal and allied subsector has enhanced the capacity to manufacture various iron and steel products in the region. To safeguard the gains in this subsector, the ministers agreed to retain the duty rate at 35% with the corresponding specific rates for imported iron and steel products for a further 1 year. In order to promote and protect textile and apparel sector, which is one of the 9 bottom-up economic transformation agenda value chains prioritized in this budget, Kenya was allowed to apply a rate of 25% on selected fabric products with corresponding specific duty rates in order to curb undervaluation and under-invoicing of imported products. Further, to ensure competitiveness of textile products that are produced locally in sufficient quantities, Kenya was granted a stay of application and will apply a higher duty of 35%. Mr. Speaker, in order to reduce production cost of animal feeds, Kenya was allowed to extend importation of inputs for manufacturers of animal feeds duty-free under the East African Community Duty Remission Scheme. Mr. Speaker, leather and leather products is one of the value chains under BETA. Kenya has sufficient supply of hides and skins to meet the demand from local manufacturers of leather and leather products. In order to promote this industry and enhance incomes of our pastoral farmers, the ministers agreed to retain a stay of application of duty import on imported leather bags at 35% for Kenya. Mr. Speaker, I have just highlighted a few of the customs measures agreed by East African Community Ministers of Finance. The complete list will be gazetted by the East African Community Secretariat and will become effective starting 1st July 2024. Let me now turn to the finance bill, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, allow me to highlight tax policy measures proposed in the Finance Bill 2024. I will begin with the proposed amendments to the Income Tax Act, followed by Value-Added Tax, Excise Duty Act, Tax Procedures Act, and miscellaneous fees and levies. Mr. Speaker, let me start with amendments to the Income Tax Act. Currently, retirement benefits, Mr. Speaker, are subjected to tax. This taxation ceases at the age of 65 years. In order to support the retired employees, I propose to amend the Income Tax Act to exempt all retirement benefits paid from the Registered Pension Fund, Registered Provident Fund, Registered Individual Retirement Fund, and National Social Security Fund and the Public Pension Scheme upon attainment of the retirement age. Mr. Speaker, for the individuals who take up early retirement, This exemption will only apply if the individual has contributed to the pension scheme for a period of 20 years from the date of registration as a member. Mr. Speaker, in addition, the annual limit of pension contribution that is exempt from tax is 30% of the individual income, or Kenya shillings 240,000, whichever is lower. Considering that this limit has not been revised since 2005, and to encourage savings for social security after retirement, I propose to increase this limit to 360,000 shillings per annum. Further, Mr. Speaker, I propose to allow deduction contribution to a post-retirement medical fund subject to a limit of Kenya shillings 10,000 per month. This will promote savings for post-retirement healthcare needs. Mr. Speaker, currently the threshold above which withholding tax applies on payments for management fees, professional fees, training fees, and contractual fees is Kenya shillings 24,000 per month. I propose to amend the Income Tax Act to remove this threshold, since it creates a room for tax planning and is a challenge to tax administration. Mr. Speaker, despite the Income Tax Act providing a corporate tax rate of 30%, some taxpayers pay tax at an effective rate of less than 15%. This is due to vigorous tax planning and tax incentives provided under the Act. To prevent this practice, I propose to amend Income Tax Act to introduce a minimum top-up tax payable by a multinational group with a consolidated annual turnover of euro 750 million, whose effective corporate tax rate is below 15%. Mr. Speaker, the spectrum of license fees paid by telecommunication operators are currently not tax deductible, creating unfairness in the tax system. In this regard, I propose to amend the Income Tax Act to allow telecommunications network operators to deduct the spectrum licenses fees over a period of 10 years. Mr. Speaker, advanced pricing agreements have emerged as a valuable tool for preventing tax disputes related to transfer pricing of cross-border transactions. In this regard, I propose to empower the Commissioner to enter into advanced pricing agreement with taxpayers engaged in transactions with related entities. Mr. Speaker, to attract international financial investors in Kenya and reinforce Kenya's position as a regional financial hub, I propose to reduce the rate of capital gains tax from 15% to 5% for firms certified by the Nairobi International Financial Center Authority. Mr. Speaker, a transfer of property between an individual and an entity where the individual holds 100% shareholding does not constitute a gain. In this respect, I propose to exclude from capital gains tax this kind of transfer. Mr. Speaker, the Digital Services Tax was introduced to prevent tax-based erosion occasioned by migration of traditional businesses from physical shops to online platform that is not feasible by the Commissioner of Tax, by the Commissioner for Tax purposes. It has been noted that the design of the tax does not capture all taxpayers, leading not only to loss of revenue, but also to unfairness in taxation. For this reason, and in line with international best practice, I propose to amend the Income Tax Act to replace the Digital Service Tax with the Significant Economic Presence Tax. Mr. Speaker, to expand the tax base and make our country self-reliant, I propose to introduce an annual motor vehicle tax at the rate of 2.5%, the value of the vehicle, subject to minimum amount of Kenya shillings 5,000. Mr. Speaker, let me now turn to gains. There are substantial gains for Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, currently the tax-free amount on subsistence allowance paid to employees in the private sector for a period spent outside the usual place of work while on official duties is capped at Kenya shillings 2,000 per day. This is quite low considering the inflation that has occurred over the years. To cushion employees in the private sector from high cost of living, I propose to review the threshold to an amount not exceeding 5% of the employee's monthly gross earnings. Second, Mr. Speaker, the Affordable Housing Levy and Pay As You Earn are calculated from the same base. leading to double taxation. To address this, I propose to make the housing levy deductible expense. This means that there is a tax savings for Kenyans and therefore affording Kenyans more money in their pocket. Mr. Speaker, in order to encourage Kenyans to continue constructing their own houses, I propose to increase the limit of interest payments that qualify for mortgage relief from Kenya shillings 300,000 to Kenya shillings 360,000 per annum. Let me turn now, Mr. Speaker, to amendments to the value-added tax. Mr. Speaker, I will now highlight the amendments of the value-added tax. Mr. Speaker, currently the registration of VAT is a requirement for a person who makes taxable supplies of Kenya shillings 5 million or more. This threshold was last reviewed in 2007. In recognition to the effect of inflation over the years and to enhance efficiency in tax administration, I propose to increase the threshold to Kenya shillings 8 million. Mr. Speaker, the VAT Act allows taxpayers making both taxable and exempt supplies to claim input tax where the proportion of exempt supplies is less than 10%. This has led to tax planning and hence loss of government revenue. To address this, I have proposed the removal of the threshold so that only the input tax relating to taxable supplies are deductible. Mr. Speaker, in support of the government's effort to combat malaria, I propose to remove VAT on mosquito repellents and raw materials used in the manufacture of repellents. This will encourage local production of the repellents. Mr. Speaker, tax expenditure was estimated at 393.6 billion, or about 2.9% of GDP for the year 2022. Of this amount, VAT tax expenditure amounted to 248.3 billion, or what is 63.1% of the total estimate of tax expenditure, which is a large erosion of the VAT tax base. Mr. Speaker, tax expenditure creates avenues for revenue leakage and thus denying government the revenue to support key priorities that benefit majority of Kenyans, of the citizens in Kenya. Recognizing the importance of tax expenditure in the promotion of investment and addressing welfare challenges in the economy, and in line with the medium-term revenue strategy, I propose to rationalize the VAT tax expenditure as provided for in the VAT Act in form of exemptions and zero rating based on the following criteria. First, that goods currently exempt be subjected to VAT. Second, zero-rated finished goods and consumer goods and services be exempt from VAT. Third, zero rating be restricted to goods and taxable services meant for export. Based on the above, Mr. Speaker, criteria, Mr. Speaker, I have proposed several amendments to the first schedule of the VAT Act in order to move some goods and services from exempt to VAT status. In addition, I have also proposed amendments to the second schedule of the VAT Act so that we can move some of the goods and services from zero rating to either exempt status or VATable. This rationalization is expected to expand the VAT tax base and create fairness in taxation. Let me turn now to amendments in the Excise Duty Act. Mr. Speaker, the tax measures I have proposed under excise duty, I propose to change as follows. I propose to change the due date of payment of excise duty on alcoholic beverages from 24 hours within 5 working days. After removal from the stockroom, the 24 hours time frame has posed administrative challenges and cash flow, as well as cash flow challenges to the taxpayers. Mr. Speaker, to protect local assemblies and create fairness and equity in taxation, I propose an introduction of excise duty on imported fully built motorcycle at the rate of 10% of the customs value, in addition to specific tax duty rate of Kenya shillings 12,952.83 per unit, whichever is higher. Mr. Speaker, participation in betting, gaming, prize competition, lotteries continues to affect socio-economic fabric of our society, given their addictive nature. Mr. Speaker, last year we raised the excise duty on these activities from 7.5 to 12.5% to discourage participation. Despite this increase, participation rate in these activities by Kenyan citizens, especially school-going children and young adults, continues to persist. To further discourage this behavior, I propose to increase the excise duty tax rates to 20%. Mr. Speaker, in line with research findings commissioned by the National Treasury on the taxation of alcoholic beverages, I propose to review the excise duty structure on wines and beer from specific rates per litre to the rate of Kenya shillings 22 shillings and 50 cents per centiliter of pure alcohol. In other words, we want to start taxing alcohol beverages on the basis of alcohol content. Further, I propose to change excise duty rate on spirits from specific rates per litre to Kenya shillings 16 per centiliter of pure alcohol. This new structure of taxation based on alcoholic content does not distort the markets, and does not affect the investment decision, and it is expected to encourage responsible consumption behavior of these alcoholic beverages. Mr. Speaker, I also propose to review excise duty structure on cigarettes in line with research conducted and advice that has recommended harmonization of excise duty rates for cigarettes with and without filters at the rate of Kenya shillings 4,100 per mille. This will reduce the incentive for misdeclaration and illicit trade. Mr. Speaker, I propose to increase the excise duty rate from Kenya shillings 1,594.50 cents per kilogram to Kenya shillings 2,000 per kilogram on products containing nicotine or nicotine substitute to address their adverse effects on human health. This excludes those approved medicinal products. Additionally, I propose to increase the excise duty rate on liquid nicotine for electronic cigarettes from Kenya shillings 70 per milliliter to Kenya shillings 100 per milliliter. Mr. Speaker, to provide fair treatment to both residents and non-residents offering excisable services, I propose to amend the Excise Duty Act to charge excisable services offered in Kenya by non-resident through a digital platform. Mr. Speaker, the Finance Act introduced excise duty on fees charged on advertisement of alcoholic beverages, betting, gaming, lotteries, and prize competition on TVs, print media, billboards, and FM stations. This resulted to a shift in choice of advertisement platform from the traditional media to internet and social media. To create a level playing field and to achieve the intended purpose, I propose to expand the scope of this tax to include fees charged on internet and social media advertisements. Mr. Speaker, in order to enhance the administrative efficiency in the issuance of excise licenses to persons dealing with excisable goods or services, I have proposed an amendment to provide for issuance of licenses within 14 working days upon receipt of all required valid documents by the Commission. Mr. Speaker, the Finance Act 2023 introduced duty on imported eggs, potatoes, onions at the rate of 25%. To promote trade across East African region, I propose the removal of this excise duty on imported eggs, potatoes, and onions originating from East African Community Partner States, subject to goods meeting the East African Community Rules of Origin. Mr. Speaker, currently, excise duty is 15% on the following: telephone, internet data services, fees charged on money transfer services by banks, fees charged on money transfer by agencies and other financial services providers, and the fees charged on cellular phone service providers. I propose to retain the excise duty rate of 15% on fees charged on money transfer services by cellular phone service providers to benefit retail electronic payments ecosystem. Let me now move to amendments to Tax Procedures Act. Mr. Speaker, I will now highlight those proposed amendments of the Tax Procedures Act, currently there is no validity period for the agency notices issued for enforcement of correction of unpaid taxes. This gap often leads to tax disputes and delayed revenue correction. To address this, I propose to amend the Tax Procedures Act to provide 1 year validity period for agency notices. Mr. Speaker, in order to align the timelines for claiming VAT and in the Tax Procedures Act and VAT Act, I propose to delete the reference on timeliness for claiming refunds under VAT Act, so that the applicable timeline is the 6 months that is provided under the Tax Procedures Act. Mr. Speaker, currently registered manufacturers whose value of investments is in the preceding year, in the preceding 3 years is at least 3 million, are exempted from withholding tax. In order to promote equity and create fairness to all manufacturers, I propose to amend the Tax Procedures Act to remove this exemption. Mr. Speaker, I propose to amend the Tax Procedures Act to clarify that enforcement and correction of taxes will be undertaken where a decision of the tribunal or court is in favor of the commissioner, and stay orders have not been obtained against the decision. Mr. Speaker, the 60 days provided to the commissioner in the Tax Procedures Act to review documents submitted by the taxpayers in support of an objection of tax assessment by the commissioner are not adequate. To ensure comprehensive review, and in order to give the commissioner adequate time, I propose to extend the timelines to object decisions of the commissioner from 60 days to 90 days. Let me now move to amendments to miscellaneous fees and levies. Mr. Speaker, last year, 17.5% export and investment promotion levy was introduced on imported goods that are also locally produced in adequate quantities. In the Finance Bill 2024, the list of goods has been expanded and the rate of the levy has been reduced to 3% for most of the goods and others 10%. Mr. Speaker, in order to facilitate the National Intelligence Service to carry out its mandate, I propose to amend the Miscellaneous Fees and Levies Act to exempt the National Intelligence Service from payments of import declaration fee and railway development levy on security equipment and motor vehicles imported or purchased locally for official use. Mr. Speaker, the high production and importation of hazardous goods, particularly electrical and electronic devices, into the country has led to significant increases in electronic waste. We call it e-waste in Kenya. This surge in waste production poses a considerable risk to both the environment and human health. In this regard, I propose to introduce eco-levy on various products to be payable in line with the polluter pays principle. Mr. Speaker, the levy will be imposed under the Miscellaneous Fees and Levies Act. Then we turn to the amendments to the Kenya Revenue Authority Act. Mr. Speaker, to enhance public knowledge and literacy on tax matters, I propose to amend the Kenya Revenue Act to enable Kenya School of Revenue Administration collaborate with other institutions of higher learning, develop curricula, assess, examine students, and award certificates in tax matters. I've submitted this amendment in a separate bill. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, the government, under the leadership of His Excellency, the President, Honorable Dr. William Samoei Ruto, has succeeded in steering the economy through a very difficult period of global and domestic challenges. Remarkably, the economy has recovered from the lagged effects of COVID-19 pandemic and unwinding from persistent and successive domestic and external shocks that created some permanent effects. Mr. Speaker, the policies and structural reforms outlined in this budget have laid a firm foundation to protect the fragile recovery for a sustained socio-economic transformation. Financing development is critical to this economic transformation. That is why raising adequate revenues is a core pillar to this economic transformation and growth. I'm confident that these measures will create jobs. They will strengthen economic recovery, and they will reduce the cost of living in the country, thereby providing the much-needed relief to the common mwananchi. I therefore urge honorable members and all Kenyans to support the implementation of the measures contained in this budget for our mutual prosperity. Finally, Mr. Speaker, achieving prosperous Kenya requires leadership and support of every Kenyan. For this reason, I wish to thank His Excellency the President, Dr. William Samoei Ruto, and His Excellency the Deputy President, Honorable Rigathi Gachagua, for their continued wise guidance and leadership and even perseverance to long hours of working to get things right. My special appreciation goes to Prime Cabinet Secretary, the Attorney General, my fellow Cabinet Secretaries, and the respective Principal Secretaries and Accounting Officers and staff of all MDAs for their support and contribution to the financial year 2024-2025 budget-making process and contributions to these budget proposals. My sincere appreciation also goes first to you, Honorable Speaker of the National Assembly, and your counterpart in the Senate, the majority and minority leaders of the entire House leadership, including respective clerks, for overseeing the approval process of the budget estimates for the financial year 2024-2025 and related documents. Second, to honorable chairs, members of both Budget and Appropriation Committee and Finance and National Planning Committee, and all the other departmental committees of this House, as well as of the staff of the Parliamentary Budget Office, for their constructive input, excellent leadership during the approval process, and the discussions that we have had in the process of these budget proposals. Third, let me thank my colleagues, the National Treasury and Economic Planning, led by Dr. Chris Kipto, the Principal Secretary and the National Treasury, and James Mohati, the Principal Secretary of State Department of Economic Planning, for their commitment, dedication, and support in the preparation of this budget process, including their own leadership in their own MDAs. Fourth, I want to thank the management and staff of the Central Bank of Kenya, Kenya Revenue Authority, financial sector regulators, and other MDAs for their contributions and advice during this budget process. My gratitude also goes to the multilateral and bilateral development partners for their continued technical and financial support. And further, I thank the private sector for its sustained contribution to the discussions we have had to support the growth of our economy. Sixth, I wish to appreciate the media and non-state actors for their active engagement and even participation in the 2024-2025 budget process. Mr. Speaker, I remain immensely grateful to my family and their support and inspiration as I execute my duties at the National Treasury and Economic Planning, which is not an easy task, and I can tell you. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, my utmost gratitude goes to all Kenyans for their contributions, proposals, and suggestions received during the finalization of the budget proposals. The outcome of these measures are to our own benefits and a reward to perseverance of the difficulties that we have gone through and to solve the difficulties ahead of us. Thank you, and may God bless you. Mr. Speaker, before I resume my seat, you recall that I have already submitted to this House the budget estimates and the Finance Bill 2024 together with the accompanying documents as required by the Public Finance Management Act 2012. Today, I further submit the following documents to this august House, and I request that you graciously receive them. First, the budget statements for the financial year 2024-25. Second, the 2024 budget policy statement. Third, estimates of revenue, grants, and loans for the financial year 2024-2025 budget. Fourth, financial statements for the financial year 2024-2025 budget. Fifth, medium-term debt management strategy 2024. Sixth, budget highlights, the Mwananchi Guide, the financial year 2024-2025 budget. And finally, statistical annex of the budget statements for the financial year 2024-2025. Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I beg to move.